Okay. So I'd like to speak to you about several questions about Reb Avrohom Elya. And first of all, what attracted you to Reb Avrohom Elya that you spent, as you told me, years translating the B'Ikvos HaYirah?
Did not coming through.
No?
I'm not hearing.
Well, I asked, what attracted you to the B'Ikvos HaYirah that you spent years translating the B'Ikvos HaYirah?
Well, what attracted me was the legend of Reb Avrohom Elya Kaplan. Here was a person who, on the one hand, was entirely rooted, not entirely, but deeply rooted in the Mussar tradition. Also was able to speak to Western European Jews. He's what I call a transition figure. The book I wrote between Berlin and Slabodka was subtitled Transition Figures from Eastern Europe. And so I've always been fascinated by people who were rooted in one tradition and were able to speak to another. And that was part of it. And of course, the tragedy of his early death, cast a certain allure. You're always asking, what could he have been? And since we don't know that, obviously, we look and see what he was. So I was fascinated by that. Then further, with respect to his writings themselves, they seem so different from other Mussar writings in many ways, not entirely, but in many ways, he seemed to really access a new depth and to really, really challenge the reader to access that with him. And as completely or as extensively as we might have done that, I at least am always left with a feeling that, you know what, maybe I didn't really get the whole thing. And that's really what it's like to speak to a Gadol Yisrael. You're edified, you're taught, you learn, but there's so much beyond that you're not accessing. And I certainly felt that when reading Rav Kaplan. So for all those reasons, yes, I was very attracted to him.
You also mentioned a musical aspect to it.
What's that?
You mentioned a musical aspect.
Oh, yes. Well, in the sense that the Mussar tries to engender within the person, the reader himself or herself, a better self-understanding, a better understanding of the Torah, a better understanding of one's life. And then there comes what Rabbi Israel called the Adam HaSholem, the complete person or the harmonious person, which we strive to achieve. We never get there, but we strive. But to the extent that we do get there, there becomes a musical aspect to one's life because things fit together. The harmony works, all the different pieces coming in from so many different directions, spiritually, family-wise, parnasa, everything from the weather to the state of the Jewish people. The more it comes together into a whole, the more harmonious it is. There's definitely a musical quality to that. So certainly sense that as the aspiration of Kaplan, and it didn't hurt any that we know that he himself was musically oriented. I myself have a background, I don't know if you'll consider this music or not, but in percussion instruments, that was a big part of my early life. And I did play in orchestras. So I do get the idea of how an orchestra comes together with everybody doing something different. And if you listen to them play individually, doesn't add up to much, but when it all comes together, it's a really beautiful experience. So I certainly got that coming through what he wrote. And he obviously felt the same with his own involvement in music.
I don't know if this is exactly what you mean, but I know I read many years ago that Reb Shlomo Volbe said that Rabbi Yerucham said about himself. He said, just naming the Sfarim, he said, Rabbi Saul was Kula Mussar, the Alta from Kelm is Chachma and Mussar, and I am only Dea Chachma and Mussar. And I think that the writings where we saw are more musical. The writings of the Alta from Kelm are somewhere in the middle, and the writings of Rabbi Yerucham, which I like very much, but they don't have that musical quality to them. And
well, if that's what Rabbi Yerucham said about himself, then what do we say about ourselves?
of course, yes.
But nonetheless, we strive. Nonetheless, we take inspiration. You know, it's often stated that when looking at these Gedolei Yisrael, including the Gedolei of Mussar, that it can be very depressing. It can be very off-putting because, you know, they reach such a level, and what does that have to do with us? It doesn't speak to us. It's so distant. It's so different from our reality. That's what many people say. I look at it the opposite. I look at it that if a person can get that far, I notice you have, you know, in your background, not only Rabbi Elya Kaplan, but also a picture of Rabbi Levine. If a person can get that far, then we should be able to strive for it. So I find it not off-putting. I find it inspiring.
I think we both have perception that Shaka Chamo was written around the Kufa of Reb Avrohom Elya being in Kelm. And obviously he transitioned from there Slabodka, and he spent time in Telz. And we spoke about this before, but I'd like you to elaborate possibly that that Reb Avrohom Elya's place on the spectrum, which I believe you said transcends the spectrum in terms of the different schools of Mussar.
You know, I would like to make an introductory comment about that. I was once sitting in the base Medrash with Rabbi Sionbrook, one of my Navardic rabbis, an unbelievable human being. And I made some comment to him about Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer. I don't remember what it was. And he looked at me severely.
Well, people might not know people might know him better as Rabbi Petterberger than Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer. Yeah.
Okay. Rabbi Petterberger, Talmud Muvok of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and the person who was most responsible for propagating Mussar in the yeshivas was and an unbelievable Talmud Chacham who became the chief rabbi of Russia at the age of 25, and who wrote an unbelievable halacha sefer. Pardon me for diverting from the diversion, but once there was a meeting of Rabbonim in Russia, and it was led by Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who presented a question to the gathering of Rabbonim. They were meeting about some public matter, but they were speaking Torah, of course, as they did when they got together. So he presented some question, and nobody could answer it. But Rabbi Petterberger sat there silent. He didn't participate in the discussion. He didn't say a thing. And so nobody could come up with an answer. And in the end, Reb Chaim presented two answers. But when he got home, he was wondering, you know, what's the deal with this person? They say he's a great Gadol of Yisrael. And he didn't seem to, you know what was going on there in the discussion. So he took out Pri Yitzchak, which was Ritzela Petterberger's sefer. He looked at it. Lo and behold, he found the same question and the same two answers that he gave, and yet he sat silent. So that's an indication of the humility and the stature of Rav Yitzchak Petterberger. Anyway, I made some remark about him to Rav Brook, and he looked at me very severely. He's rarely severe, but he could be severe. And he said, you know, you can't, something to the effect, you know, you can't talk that way. What do you understand of Rav Yitzchak Petterberger? You know, who are you to talk about Rav Yitzchak Petterberger? Is a very important message of perspective, and it's a perspective I think we all have to have as we talk about these great people. It's all in the framework of kiviyachol, as it were. We're talking about them, we're learning from them as best we can, but we're not really grasping them. So when I think about Reb Avrohom Elya Kaplan, I think that as he went from Slabodka to the West, it's not so much that he changed, he added. It's not so much that anything was eliminated or even modified from his Mussar background. It was just expanded. He added. That's what made him a transition figure, and that's what made him so effective in the end, both where he came from in those circles and where he ended up in Berlin in those circles.
The in what respect? So that was fine tuning the question a bit. So, in what aspect did Reb Avrohom Elya exemplify Slabodka, and what aspect did he exemplify Berlin?
Well, first of all, if you look in the B'Ikvos HaYirah in that essay, you read it, it's cool Mussar. It's by which I mean to say it's written in a style that demands an awfully lot of the reader. It's not laid out, here's the thesis, here's the proof, here's the conclusion, beginning, middle, end, not that whatsoever. You have to struggle to understand what he says in each phrase. Then you have to struggle to put the phrases together. Then once you've put the phrases together into part, you've got to put the parts together. And it's not that he's sort of difficult to be difficult. It's because the Mussar tries to engage the person, not so much to inform the person, not even to inspire the person, but to engage the person. That is to say, to make the person participate. A good Mussar shmooze is not something.
It's an amazing definition, right? That's fascinating.
It's not a good Mussar shmooze is something you sit back, in a seat and you enjoy and you walk out inspired. It doesn't work that way. Mussar is not to inspire you, it's to change you. And the only way it can be changed is for you to change yourself. So the Mussar writing, the real Mussar writings try to engage you in a way that you're changing yourself as you're going along. So in that sense, he was, entirely within the Mussar framework. But then when you look at the substance of what he's saying, just to take one example, and he starts talking about Yirah Shamayim, properly defined, as including joy, as including, good cheer. You see that there's a substance here that's different. You see that there's a new approach. He gave a beautiful example of a father carrying a child on his shoulders. So the father's carrying the child on his shoulders. He's full of trepidation. He doesn't want to drop the child, God forbid. But on the other hand, he's so elated, so exalted by the fact that he has a child. They both go together at once. This is how he defines Yirah Shamayim. It's not only the trepidation, but it's the joy. So here you see a person who has incorporated, but yet gone beyond the Mussar.
So I'm going to follow up again. Many years ago, I wrote an article for the Jewish Observer, and the article was about a review of the biography of Yosef Carlebach. And a lot of the article, perhaps inadvertently, showcased the fact that German Jews, in the form of Rabbi Carlebach and his brothers, who came as chaplains with the German army during World War I, had a tremendous impact on the educational system, specifically in Tels and throughout Lithuania, helping start the Avna system and education for girls. And this brought up a whole question.
My phone is ringing. Let me turn it off. I apologize. Okay, sorry.
So it's brought up a whole question, should they publish the article or not? Because the article went against conventional assumption that German Judaism was always deficient and inferior. Lithuanian Judaism was always superior and certainly self-sustaining. And here the Germans are coming and saving the Lithuanians. So at that time they went to a Rosh Yeshiva, one of the Rosh Yeshiva, his name I don't want to mention, but he should live and be well. And they asked, so he said, the simple question said, is it true? And he said, yes, it's true. So he said, if it's true, then publish it. So, and they did publish it. So, somehow we managed to survive that. So let me ask you from your perspective, what did Berlin add to Slabodka? What were the things which made perhaps an Odom HaSholem or a Yadus Shlema, so to speak, that came out of Berlin to Slabodka?
Well, first thing it added was a curriculum. It added a whole academic, range of disciplines. It added, formal study of history, formal study of language, of science. So it added a whole curriculum. That is certainly mind expanding. But then it added everything that comes with the curriculum, a certain curiosity, a certain expansion of the appreciation of the creation. It's one thing to appreciate the creation in the sense of looking at all the beauties of nature, and of course that can't be replaced. But on the other hand, the more you know of chemistry, the more you know biology, physiology, physics, the more you appreciate the creation. So it added all of that. And with that, it added a problem. And the problem is, well, there's only so much time a person has in life. So how much time should I be spending on Torah, and how much time should I be spending on whatever other discipline I choose, be it in science, be it in study of history or other humanities? It added that problem. So it added that tension. But at the same time, it expanded the mind and expanded the soul.
And because let me ask that. Obviously, I think you mentioned it to me when we spoke last time. You came when you wrote your book. It's a groundbreaking perspective, as I believe you said to me that anything else you wrote about, there was what to research. Here, there wasn't what to research. You had to start from scratch, and you wrote also in longhand, which you said was symbolic of the difficulty of the venture. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, this is the only book I've written where I started with a blank piece of paper. As difficult as it is to write on the Gra, for example, I've published 2 Svarim in the Gra. As almost indecipherable as a Gra is, you're still starting with his text. The words are in front of you. You're studying with you're trying to write on the writings of Rabbi Salanter, very difficult. You're still starting with the writings. You want to translate B'Ikvos HaYirah, difficult, but you're starting with the text in front of you. What I wrote between Berlin and Slabodka, I was really trying to pull out of my own soul what I understood of these great people. So I started with a blank piece of paper. That's very intimidating. And then I wrote by hand because I felt that I needed to achieve that level of certainty that I could do it. Of all the amazing stories told about Rabbi Yosef, the one that's most meaningful to me is this. Some of the famous tshuvas that he wrote in his 40s, they were written in one draft, longhand, no crossouts. That is the sign of a great Gadol B'Yisrael. Everything is so clear that it doesn't need versions, doesn't need editing. So I've never achieved that level, but something along that line. I felt as I was writing this, I had to achieve the certainty of what was in my own mind, my own soul, based on what I had observed and read over many years.
What would the degree, and I think you already mentioned this to a large extent, but I want to mention as a unique question. What would somebody coming to Reb Avrohom Elya for the first time find? And I want to specifically tell you that I think that I would like to gear this answer, your answer possible, to a young yeshiva bacher. Who only knows about Mussar, what he has from learning Mesilas Yesharim or Chovos HaLevavos or Orchos Tzadikim, which are great for him and essentials for him. But when it comes to Rabbi Avrohom Elya, read B'Ikvos HaYirah, it's very different.
Well, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, the Rosh Hashiva in Denver, may live and be well, says every year the 9th graders get younger and younger. So I'm not sure what I understand of the yeshiva bacher these days who are younger and younger. So what I suspect, I'd be pleased to be proven wrong, but what I suspect is what people expect when they come to a sefer is that it should go rather smoothly. It should be laid out rather clearly. It shouldn't demand, it shouldn't be like a Tosfos. It shouldn't demand, a lot of work and energy and disappointment and difficulty. It should, move forth in a way that's accessible and I can spend little time and gain something, and that's the way it is. B'Ikvos HaYirah doesn't work that way. As I said earlier, it demands work. It demands patience. It demands reading something and going over it again and again, and not just throwing up your hands and saying, this doesn't make any sense, or it just doesn't speak to me. I'll move on to something else. Have to be prepared to understand that there is profundity not only in Tosfos, but there's profundity in great Jewish thought and a great Mussar thought. B'Ikvos HaYirah, primary example.
I have to tell you, when I wrote one of my essays on Reb Avrohom Elya, I wrote that I quoted in the opening of the Birnbaum Siddur. When we were young, we downloaded out of the Birnbaum Siddur. So he writes that there's a German poet Herder who said that it was worth learning Hebrew just to read Tehillim Kuf Dalet or Chinafshi in the original, and because no translation could capture Baruch Nafshi. So I feel the same thing about Reb Avrohom Elya, and to me what's tragic is that the average yeshiva bacher, certainly the average American yeshiva bacher, not Israeli, but the average American yeshiva bacher doesn't have the language to even begin to understand a Michtav Eliyahu, much less a B'Ikvos HaYirah. Our system does not educate kids to be able to read this kind of Hebrew. And it's a tremendous, tremendous problem, in my opinion. I don't see it being resolved in any way, shape, or form.
This is not our topic today, but this also is exactly the problem that a Jew has in trying to explain the Torah to somebody who doesn't know Hebrew, and trying to explain the way Hebrew is layered and the way within the same letters and same words you can have multiple legitimate meanings, and the beauty of that and the limitations of that. Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. Yeah, you have to learn. It's a great privilege to learn the Hebrew, to be able to read the Tehillim. And once you know the Hebrew, you sort of have to learn the next language, the next level up or the next level to the side, whatever the metaphor is. Takes training, takes challenge, and basically what it takes is rebbes who are willing to, show and guide their talmidim along the way.
So in order to kind of sum up, I'm sure it's a fascinating conversation. Spend many hours, and perhaps you'll be kind enough to allow me to have these conversations in the future. I'd very much appreciate that. But for today, if you had to give a few words to conclude about who Reb Avrohom Elya was and how Mussar had him and other Bali Mussar, but today's Reb Avrohom Elya's day, but anybody else, but how they had an impact upon you and how you try to transmit that further.
How it impacted on me? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I
think you're unique in that you've had.
I've asked myself that question. I can't explain, but when I first began to learn about Mussar, it spoke to me, spoke to my soul. The idea of introspection, the idea of not taking things, in a black and white way, the idea of putting your emotions into it, and using your mind and your emotions together. That spoke to me. It doesn't speak to everybody, and that's okay. I once had a wonderful conversation with a Boston Rebbe. I was very close. Levi Yitzchak Horowitz of Boston, a blessed memory. Once had a discussion with him, and he was telling me the following. Listen, Hasidus is for me, and for a lot of people, and Mussar's for you. That's okay. We need to have something, whatever it is, to enhance our avodas Hashem. And so he said, for me, it's Hasidus, for you, it's Mussar. That's great. So I would just say the exact reverse. The Mussar speaks to me, but if something else speaks to somebody else, that's fine too. It's a big world out there, and it's a big world of Jewish thought because it's infinite. It's literally infinite because it derives from the Almighty. So the Mussar speaks to me, had a great impact on everything I've done, written, the way I look at the world. But other strands of Jewish life and thinking and thought and experience speak to others. That's fine.
Echad Amarbe v'Echad Amamit, v'vad shechaven es libo l'shamayim. V'eit es chaven libo l'shamayim.
So thank you for all your work that you do. And
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Avrohom Elya Kaplan is a great tzaddik and go.
I'd like to start. We're going to start recording here. Just a second.